I am a custom model railroad layout designer. I also edit a magazine called the Layout Design Journal, which is published by the Layout Design SIG. And I do some technical marketing consulting as well, but that's not nearly as much fun to talk about. So I've been doing custom model railroad designs for about 17 years now. I've done a couple hundred designs for other people. I've been editing the magazine for, I don't know, 10 years or so. And I've been around the hobby for a long time. The Bay Area where I live, Northern California, is great for, there's so many layouts, so much going on. So I have a lot of great friends, a lot of great layouts to visit and operate on once we get back to doing that. You know, I started out looking at John Armstrong's track planning for realistic operation. I bought the book in a hobby shop. You remember hobby shops?
Yeah.
Just thought this makes sense. This is systematic. This is based on concepts, and it kind of grew from there.
If people don't know, this is
my spokesmodel, Heath.
I know. This is just the book that he mentioned, Track Planning for Realistic Operations.
So this presentation I'm going to make at the NMRA National Convention in Santa Clara, although it's all virtual, but it's officially in Santa Clara in a few weeks, is called Make Only New Mistakes. And the idea is to look at how people design layouts and you know, see if there are things we can learn so we don't have to start over every time. I talk about layout design in kind of three phases, and they are not firm, hard phases. They are fuzzy and gray. The first is conceptual, which is unbounded. So you're thinking about a story you want to tell, just like that question commented. What's the theme? What do you want the layout to look like, work like? So it's a very unbounded stage. And most model railroaders have terrible trouble with this. They cannot unhook themselves from just plopping down track. The structural phase is next after you've got a concept, and maybe we'll talk about that some more. After you've got this idea, the story you want to tell, the structural phase is really like a footprint phase, and you're thinking about how to fit that into the space that you have. Just as Heath was talking about, you know, there are different shapes, different ways you can fit a layout into a room, and that's what the structural phase is. Now, at that point, the conceptual phase is very unbounded, not to scale. It's a wonderful, lovely, gauzy time. Structural phase is where it gets real a little, and you have to start doing things to scale. And so even though it's not in a lot of detail yet, I will draw kind of roughly where a yard's going to go and roughly the length it needs to be, where the key curves are, and so on. Because you want to be sure that this thing you developed in the, you know, fuzzy phase will fit in the room. And then finally, you know, eventually you get to detail. Like, my contention is, and it's a little bit controversial, especially for that person, but if you go to CAD too soon, it puts the detail first and you paint yourself into a corner, potentially. So I think even with the small layout, I mean, I've done layouts that are a few square feet. I still start with a concept. You know, what is this supposed to do? Because if you look at, you know, these triangles there that would have been beautifully animated if you could have seen them, the amount of time you spend, certainly you spend a lot of time on the detail, but the importance really is weighted toward the conceptual phase, in my view, because otherwise you build a layout, it fits the room maybe, you cram in a lot of turnouts maybe, but it's not telling a story, or the story it's telling is pretty crazy.
You've mentioned in all this stuff I've seen, you don't really talk about scale a lot.
You know, well, no, And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that most of these principles are the same in all the scales. I mean, where it gets different is how far you can reach, how big is a turnback curve, a blob, because they're too big to reach across in HO and larger scales. You have to think about access. But I think even, everybody's got their own way. I'm not saying this is the only way for sure. But I would just encourage people, even people who have done it other ways and, have had good success. If you take a step back and think about the story you're trying to tell, I think it will help you do those other things better. And that's, I just don't want to short circuit that thought about what are we trying to accomplish.
Do you have Byron? Do you have a checklist or anything, or like just some standard questions that you send to people
Yeah,
when you're like, if someone comes to you and says, I found your website, which is layoutvision.com, and I would like you to design a layout. Are there some standard questions you ask?
yeah. So on the website, I think under the layout design tab, there's questions for prospective clients, and it's a little bit free form, and nobody ever does them all. I don't expect anyone to do them all, but it's actually a way for people to organize their thinking, and that works really well. So people tell me I'm more interested in switching, like probably Jason is, or I'm more interested in mainline running. I'm more interested in seeing the trains that I grew up with, or I'm more interested in operations. And so I basically get that, and from that I distill the concept for them. usually, usually they couldn't tell you their concept. They can answer a bunch of questions, um, uh, and then when I go back to them and say, "Well, it sounds like you want to like, for example, I did a design for actually a Louisiana railroad, but it was freelanced narrow gauge, cotton and wood products and so on. And the guy said, "Well, I think this is the shape." He drew something and scanned it and sent it to me. He says, "I think this is the shape. So can you do that?" Whoa, whoa, whoa. I didn't say that exactly. What I said was, interesting thought. Um, let's do this because it sounds like the story you want to tell is um, mostly about cotton, and mostly about all the things and lumber and turpentine and these things that go with it. And you want to give some space. You want to have river crossings. You want to tell a story about what that part of Louisiana is like. And he said, that's what I said when I sent you the drawing. That's yeah, and you always, the very next phase after this conceptual phase where you're kind of thinking in free form is you got to fit it to the space. So, you know, plans last until the first contact with the opposing force. But if the other thing the concept does, I think that's important, and I think Robert and Jason both, did this as part of their planning, it sounds like, is you keep coming back to the concept and testing things against it. Like, do I need a huge passenger station if I'm really focused on industrial? No. So that touchstone is there. You keep coming back to it, and you can, save yourself a lot of grief by being able to say, yeah, no, that doesn't fit. Now, I have to be more formal about it because it's not my concept. It's the client's concept. So I really have to pay close attention to it and not drift. But even for individuals designing for themselves, I think it's important. Yeah, so this is the same space, kind of the same concept, and 4 different footprints. So what I do with these is you're really just managing these blobs, these turnback curves, and finding places to put the turnback curves. The story this guy wanted to tell, this is a coastal Oregon railroad that interacts and interchanges with the SP. This railroad runs east-west. And he had a big mill kit from BTS and wanted that to fit somewhere on the layout. And so I was just kind of plunking down curves in different places, connecting them with relatively straight tracks. This is coastal mountainous Oregon, so the tracks curve. And then eventually, what we settled on was something a little different, but very similar. What I say in clinics and stuff is you want to modulate the bench work, not legislate the bench work. So you don't want to say, oh, I'm going to have 2 foot. Now, occasionally it's a modular layout or something like that, and you t-trak and the bench work is fixed. But for most people, letting it curve is a better idea. Letting it curve puts more railroad in the same space, and still keeps your access.
So just to restate them as well, your 3 steps are conceptual, structural, then detail. So we're on the structural phase now, but
Right.
you've showed us a layout with a lot of the detail already worked out on it, but we're just sort of.
And Heath, you mentioned that there seems to be a lot of detail in this. There really isn't very much detail. There are things drawn to scale. Well, I mean, there's more maybe than you expect, but there are things drawn to scale only so I know that they fit. So that's a real turntable outline. That's a real yard ladder that really could fit. So those things I do in detail. But you can see at Yaquina Bay, it's just like, yeah, there's some tracks there. I don't know, something like that.
Would you mind going to the very end of your slide deck? You have some more slides, and I think one of the slides you showed was an 8x10 layout in the room, and in one of the slides you have it in the center of the room, and the other slides you showed around the outside, and then you also show a 4x8.
Yeah. So oh yeah, that's it. Well,
Yeah,
I'll start here, and then we can get to the other thing.
And I think this falls under structural, I believe.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We're still in structural. So I had a client who had this kind of alcove in his basement, I think. The dotted red line on the my left here, I don't know which side it is, on the left side of the slide is it's a political boundary. There's an aisle out there, but nothing else. So he said, what I want to build is a layout that's 5 feet wide, leave myself 18-inch aisles, and that's what I want. Design me that. And I said, yeah, I could, but you'll hate me forever for it, and I can't deal with that kind of bad karma. So here's what you should build instead. So we curve the thing. There are some tight spots. There are still 18-inch aisles, but there are wider spots where somebody would stand to operate. And so, you want to see the space, not a rectangle, and think about how you can curve things. Again, we're still dealing with blobs. This is still a blob. We've got one curve inside another, which is a good space-saving technique. Over here, we have curves inside one another, but still, you've got this space you're still dealing with. Again, we just started with the curves here. Now, by the way, in a 9x9 room, a 4x8 won't fit. You can't get the door open. You've got, only a foot at one end. A 4x8 doesn't fit, but something better does. So here, these are 22-inch radius curves. This might not be exactly the way I design it, but what you want to do is put the layout outside the room and put the people inside very often. So the people are in the middle. I'm pointing to the screen like you guys can see. The people in the middle here, let the layout be on the outside. Now, you would need some kind of hatch or an opening in these two areas to get to the track. But this is the kind of thing that people don't realize. They think a 4x8 is a small layout. It's not. A 4x8 takes at least an 8x10 room. And in an 8x10 room, you can do a lot of other things.
It's all about humanity. about humanity. About humanity. It's all about humanity.